For thousands of years, before the rise of Rome,
Before the glory of Greece, and before the great civilizations of Europe, a kingdom emerged along one of the most extraordinary rivers on earth.
the Nile, stretching across one of the harshest environments on the planet. The Nile created something almost impossible, a land of abundance surrounded by desert. Every year, the river flooded its banks, leaving behind fertile soil that allowed communities to grow crops,
Raise animals, and build permanent settlements.
while many ancient peoples remained scattered. The people of the Nile Valley learned to cooperate, organize,
And create one of history's first great civilizations.
but Egypt was not created overnight. Thousands of years before the pyramids, small farming communities developed along the river. Over time, these villages became larger towns.
Connected by trade and shared traditions.
By around 3100 BCE, two regions dominated the Nile Valley. Upper Egypt in the south, where the Nile flowed through narrow valleys.
Lower Egypt in the north, where the river spread into the fertile Nile Delta.
For generations,
These two lands developed separately,
with their own rulers and symbols.
but eventually, one leader changed the course of history.
According to ancient tradition, a ruler named Naba united Upper and Lower Egypt, creating the first Egyptian kingdom.
Whether through conquest,
Diplomacy, or a combination of both, this unification created something revolutionary.
a centralized state ruled by a divine king.
The Egyptian pharaoh was not simply a political leader,
Egyptians believed the pharaoh maintained
but the balance and order of the universe. The king controlled armies, organized massive building projects, managed agriculture, and connected humanity with the gods. This idea of divine kingship would shape Egypt for more than 3,000 years. The civilization born beside the Nile
would become one of the longest-lasting societies in human history.
but its greatest achievements were still to come. After unification, Egypt entered a new era. The first dynasties established a powerful centralized government that controlled the Nile Valley from the Mediterranean coast to the southern border. The early pharaohs built their authority through religion,
Administration and monumental architecture.
Egyptians believed that death was not an ending, but a transition into another existence. This belief transformed their civilization. The tomb became a place where the dead could continue their journey. During the Old Kingdom, Egypt reached one of its greatest achievements, the construction of the pyramids. The pyramids were not built by slaves, as later legends claimed.
Archaeological evidence shows that many workers were skilled laborers.
Farmers during the Nile flood season, craftsmen, and organized teams supported by the state. The greatest symbol of this age was the Great Pyramid of Giza, built during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu around 2600 BCE. For nearly 4,000 years, it remained the tallest human-made structure on Earth. The pyramids represented more than royal tombs. They demonstrated Egypt's ability to organize thousands of people,
Manage resources, develop mathematics,
and transform human ambition into stone. But even the greatest kingdoms faced challenges. Over time, powerful regional governors gained influence, central authority weakened, and Egypt entered a period of instability known as the First Intermediate Period. The kingdom that built monuments, meant to last forever, discovered
that even eternal
civilizations could change. After the collapse of the Old Kingdom, Egypt entered a period of political division and uncertainty. The power of the pharaoh weakened. Local rulers gained independence. Rival kingdoms competed for control of the Nile Valley.
for ordinary Egyptians. This was a time of instability.
The centralized order that had built the pyramids had disappeared, but Egypt had survived crises before. Around 2050 BCE, a new dynasty rose from southern Egypt and began restoring unity. This period became known as the Middle Kingdom, a time when Egypt rebuilt its strength and transformed itself once again. The pharaohs of the Middle
Kingdom understood that power was not only
measured by monuments, but by effective government. They strengthened administration, improved agriculture, expanded trade, and created a more stable society. One of the most important rulers of this era was Mentuhotep II, who reunited Egypt after centuries of division. His victory created a second great Egyptian revival. Later rulers expanded Egypt's influence beyond its traditional borders.
Egyptian armies moved into Nubia to the south,
securing valuable resources such as gold, stone, and trade routes. The Middle Kingdom also became an age of literature and intellectual achievement. Egyptian writers produced stories, teachings, and philosophical works that reveal a society deeply interested in morality, leadership, and human experience. Unlike the Old Kingdom, where the pharaoh was often portrayed as distant and almost completely divine, Middle Kingdom literature sometimes presented rulers as responsible guardians, who had a duty toward their people. Egypt was not only building monuments, it was developing ideas. However, Egypt's position was eventually threatened by foreign groups entering from Western Asia. The Hyksos, a people from the Near East, gradually gained control of parts of northern Egypt. They introduced new military technologies, including the horse-drawn chariot and improved bronze weapons. For centuries, Egypt had dominated its neighbors. Now, for the first time, foreign rulers controlled the heart of the Nile Delta. But this humiliation would create the motivation for Egypt's greatest transformation yet. The struggle against the Hyksos would give birth to the most powerful period in Egyptian history, the era of the New Kingdom. The arrival of the Hyksos changed Egypt forever. For generations, Egyptians remembered the experience of foreign rule. But instead of weakening the civilization, this crisis transformed it. Egypt learned that survival required a stronger military, better organization, and a more ambitious vision. Around 1550 BCE, Egyptian rulers from Thebes launched a successful campaign to drive out the Hyksos. The warrior king Amaze defeated the foreign rulers and reunited Egypt. But this victory created something new. Egypt was no longer simply a wealthy river kingdom. It became an empire. The period that followed became known as the New Kingdom, the age when Egypt reached its greatest territorial power. Egyptian armies expanded into Nubia and pushed north into the Levant, creating a network of territories, alliances, and trade connections. The pharaohs of this era became some of the most famous rulers in history. One of the earliest great leaders was Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most successful monarchs. Unlike many female rulers in the ancient world, Hatshepsut ruled as pharaoh herself. She focused less on conquest and more on economic expansion. Her famous trading expedition to the land of Punt brought back valuable goods including incense, exotic animals, and rare resources. Her reign demonstrated that Egyptian power was not built only through war. It was also built through diplomacy, trade, and wealth. Later, Egypt faced a different challenge. A young pharaoh named Akhenaten attempted one of the most dramatic religious changes in ancient history. He promoted worship of the sun disk, Actor, and reduced the influence of Egypt's traditional priesthood. He moved the capital to a new city called Akhenaten. But after his death, his reforms were largely abandoned, and traditional religious practices returned. Then came one of Egypt's most famous rulers, Ramesses II, known as Ramesses the Great. He ruled for more than 6 decades and became a symbol of Egyptian power. His reign was marked by enormous building projects, military campaigns, and the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittite Empire. Although neither side achieved a complete victory, the conflict eventually produced one of the earliest known international peace treaties. Under the New Kingdom pharaohs, Egypt reached the height of its influence. Its temples, armies, and culture dominated the Eastern Mediterranean. But behind the glory, new challenges were beginning to appear. The empire that had expanded across foreign lands would soon struggle to defend them. The name of Egypt echoed across the ancient world. Its temples reached toward the sky. Its armies marched across foreign lands. Its pharaohs presented themselves as protectors chosen by the gods. But beneath the appearance of eternal power, the Egyptian empire was entering a dangerous new era. The reign of Ramesses II, often called Ramesses the Great, represented both the peak of Egyptian ambition and the beginning of the challenges that would eventually weaken the kingdom. When Ramesses became pharaoh around 1279 BCE, Egypt was no longer the uncontested power of previous generations. A new rival had emerged in the Near East, the Hittite Empire. The struggle between Egypt and the Hittites centered on control of Syria, one of the most valuable regions of the ancient world, because of its trade routes and strategic position. In 1274 BCE, Ramesses led a massive army north to confront the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh. The battle became one of the most famous military events of the ancient world. Egyptian inscriptions portrayed Ramesses as a heroic conqueror who defeated his enemies through courage and divine support. However, historians believe the battle was likely more complicated. The Hittite army was powerful, and neither side achieved a decisive victory. Eventually, Egypt and the Hittites chose negotiation over endless war. The result was one of history's earliest known peace agreements. It demonstrated an important lesson. Even the greatest empires could not rely on military power alone. Diplomacy became necessary. Although remembered as a warrior king, Ramesses was also one of history's greatest builders. Across Egypt, he constructed temples, statues, and monuments designed to preserve his memory forever. The most famous example was Abu Simbel, a massive temple carved into the cliffs of southern Egypt. Its enormous statues of Ramesses displayed the traditional
Egyptian belief that the pharaoh was not merely a ruler, but a symbol of stability and divine order. The city of Ramesses, his royal capital in the Nile Delta, became a center of administration,
trade, and military power, but monuments required enormous resources. Building projects, maintaining armies,
and controlling distant territories
placed increasing pressure on the
Egyptian economy.
Around the end of the 13th century BCE, the entire eastern Mediterranean world entered a period of crisis. Powerful kingdoms collapsed, trade networks disappeared, cities were destroyed.
The causes remain debated by historians, but evidence suggests a combination of factors:
climate changes, economic disruption,
internal conflicts,
invasions and migrations.
Among the mysterious groups involved were the Sea Peoples,
whose movements shook the ancient world. Egypt became one of the few major civilizations able to survive this collapse. During the reign of Ramesses III, Egypt fought a major battle
against these invading groups.
Around the early 12th century BCE, Egypt claimed victory, but the conflict weakened the kingdom.
The empire that once projected power across the region began retreating.
After the great Ramesside rulers, Egypt entered a long period of gradual decline. The authority of the pharaoh weakened. The influence of powerful priests increased, especially the priesthood of Amun at Thebes. Economic difficulties affected workers, soldiers, and ordinary people. One of the most revealing events occurred during the reign of Ramesses III, when workers at the royal tombs in Deir el-Medina organized one of the earliest recorded labor strikes in history. The workers had not received their expected food supplies,
and they protested against the government.
This event reveals an important truth.
Even in a civilization famous for powerful kings,
ordinary people could challenge authority. Egypt was still a great civilization, but the age of unquestioned dominance was ending. Foreign powers began looking toward the Nile Valley. The empire of the pharaohs would survive, but it would never again reach the same heights. For more than 2,000 years, Egypt had been ruled by its own pharaohs. But now, the world around it was changing. New empires were rising. The Assyrians built one of the most powerful military states the ancient world had ever seen.
Their armies expanded across the Near East, eventually reaching Egypt.
In the 7th century BCE, Assyrian forces invaded Egypt and briefly conquered parts of the country. For the first time in centuries, a foreign empire controlled the land of the pharaohs. However, Egyptian independence was restored under the 26th dynasty, also known as the Saite period. This era saw a revival of Egyptian traditions. Rulers restored temples, encouraged trade, and looked back to earlier periods of Egyptian greatness. But Egypt's independence was temporary. A new power was rising from the east,
the Persian Empire.
In 525 BCE, Persian king Cambyses II conquered Egypt. Egypt became part of the vast Persian imperial system.
Although Persian
rule brought new administration and connections with the wider world, many Egyptians viewed foreign domination as a loss of their ancient independence.
Then history produced another dramatic turning point.
A young Macedonian conqueror arrived from Europe. His name was Alexander the Great. For centuries, Egypt had been shaped by the rise and fall of powerful kingdoms. But in the 4th century BCE, a new force emerged from the northern Mediterranean. A young Macedonian king was building an empire unlike anything the world had seen. His name was Alexander the Great. In 330 BCE, Alexander entered Egypt after defeating the Persian forces that controlled the country.
Unlike previous conquerors,
Alexander presented himself not as a destroyer of Egypt's traditions,
but as a liberator. Egyptian priests welcomed him because he
respected their religious customs and accepted the traditional role of the pharaoh. At the ancient city of Memphis, Alexander was recognized as Egypt's new ruler. He then founded a city that would transform the history of the Mediterranean, Alexandria, located on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Alexandria was designed to become a center of trade, knowledge, and culture. It would later become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. But Alexander's Egyptian kingdom would not last long. In 323 BCE, Alexander died unexpectedly at the age of only 32. His enormous empire collapsed into conflict among his generals. One of those generals was Ptolemy, who seized control of Egypt. This created a new dynasty, the Ptolemaic kingdom. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries.
They were Greek-speaking rulers,
but they understood that Egypt could not be governed without respecting its ancient traditions. The Ptolemaic kings adopted the titles and religious symbols of pharaohs. They built temples in traditional Egyptian style. They supported Egyptian priests. They presented themselves as successors to the ancient kings of the Nile. But Egypt was also becoming a more international society. Alexandria attracted people from across the Mediterranean and Near East. Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, merchants, scholars, and sailors lived together in one of the ancient world's most diverse cities. The city became famous for its intellectual achievements. The Library of Alexandria became a symbol of human knowledge, attracting scholars who studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and philosophy.
During this period, Egypt became a bridge between ancient Egyptian civilization and the wider Greek world. The most famous ruler of Ptolemaic Egypt was the final monarch of the dynasty, Cleopatra VII. She came to power in 51 BC during a period of political instability. Unlike the stereotype that later surrounded her, Cleopatra was not simply a figure of beauty and romance.
She was a skilled politician, diplomat, and intellectual. She spoke several languages and
understood the complex politics of the
Mediterranean world. Her greatest challenge was the growing power of Rome. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had become the dominant force in the Mediterranean. Egypt was wealthy, but politically vulnerable.
Cleopatra first formed an alliance with the Roman general Julius Caesar.
After Caesar's assassination,
she later allied with Mark Antony, one of Rome's most powerful leaders.
Together,
they attempted to maintain Egypt's independence while Rome moved towards civil war, but their enemies, led by Octavian, defeated them at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC.
A year later,
Roman forces entered Egypt. Cleopatra died in 30 BC. With her death, the last independent kingdom of ancient Egypt disappeared.
Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire.
The age of the pharaohs had ended,
but Egypt itself was far from forgotten. Its culture, ideas,
and monuments would continue influencing the world for thousands of years.
When Rome conquered Egypt in 30 BCE, it did not simply acquire another territory.
It gained control of one of the richest lands in the ancient world.
The Nile Valley produced enormous amounts of grain, making Egypt essential to the Roman Empire. The Emperor Augustus, Rome's first emperor, understood Egypt's importance.
Unlike other provinces, Egypt was placed under the direct control of the emperor.
Roman governors managed the country, collected taxes,
and ensured the steady flow of grain to Rome.
For ordinary Egyptians, life changed. The pharaohs were gone.
Roman officials now held power.
But many traditions survived.
Temples continued operating. Egyptian priests continued worshipping ancient gods.
The Roman rulers even portrayed themselves in the traditional
style of Egyptian kings,
presenting themselves as protectors of Egyptian religious order. This created a fascinating blend of cultures.
Roman, Greek, and Egyptian traditions existed together along the Nile.
During the 1st century CE, another transformation began. A new religion emerged from the Eastern Mediterranean,
Christianity.
Egypt became one of the most important centers of early Christianity. Alexandria developed into a major theological and intellectual center. Christian communities grew throughout the country, eventually becoming a dominant force in Egyptian society.
The rise of Christianity changed Egypt's ancient religious landscape.
Many traditional temples declined.
New churches appeared.
The old world of pharaohs slowly disappeared.
Yet Egypt remained culturally important. Its scholars, monks,
and writers influenced the development of Christianity across the Roman Empire.
For nearly 7 centuries, Egypt had been part of the Roman and Byzantine worlds.
But in the 7th century CE, a new power emerged from the Arabian Peninsula. The armies of Islam rapidly expanded across the Middle East and North Africa,
bringing a new political and religious order.
In 639 CE, a Muslim army led by Amr ibn As entered Egypt.
At the time, Egypt was ruled by the Byzantine Empire,
which was weakened by years of conflict with the Persian Empire and internal divisions.
By 641 CE, Byzantine control collapsed, and Egypt became part of the expanding Islamic world.
This was one of the greatest turning points in Egyptian history. The language, religion, and political structure of Egypt began to transform.
After the conquest, Amr ibn As founded a new administrative center,
Fustat,
located near modern Cairo. Fustat became the first Islamic capital of Egypt. Unlike previous conquerors who ruled from distant imperial centers,
the new rulers created a government directly connected to the region. Egypt's importance remained enormous. Its fertile lands continued producing grain.
Its location connected Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean.
Its cities became centers of trade, scholarship, and culture. Over time, Arabic became the dominant language, while Islam became the religion of the majority of the population. However, this transformation was gradual.
Egypt's Christian community, known as the Copts,
remained an important part of Egyptian society.
For centuries, Egypt was ruled by different Islamic dynasties. Each left its mark on the country.
Under the Fatimid Caliphate, Egypt experienced a golden age of learning and architecture.
In 969 CE, the Fatimids founded a new city,
Cairo.
The city was designed as a political and cultural capital.
One of its greatest achievements was the creation of Azhar, which became one of the world's oldest centers of Islamic learning.
Cairo grew into a major city connecting trade routes between Africa, Europe, and Asia.
In the 12th century, Egypt became central to a major conflict between Islamic powers and European crusaders.
The most famous Egyptian ruler of this era was Saladin, born in Tikrit and later becoming ruler of Egypt. Saladin united Egypt and Syria against the Crusader states.
His victory at the Battle of Hattin in 1187
CE allowed him to recapture Jerusalem. Although remembered differently by different cultures,
Saladin became known for military skill, political intelligence,
and his reputation for generosity toward enemies. His rise showed that Egypt remained a key power in the wider Middle East. After Saladin's dynasty weakened, another group rose to power, the Mamluks.
Originally military slaves trained as elite soldiers,
the Mamluks eventually became rulers themselves.
From the 13th to the early 16th centuries,
they transformed Egypt into one of the strongest states in the Islamic world. They defeated the Mongols at the Battle of Angelut in 1260 CE, stopping further Mongol expansion into the Middle East. They also built magnificent mosques, schools, and monuments across Cairo. During the Mamluk period, Cairo became one of the greatest cities on earth.
But their power depended heavily on controlling trade routes.
A new global force was about to change everything.
The discovery of new sea routes around Africa would reduce Egypt's traditional importance as a center of world trade,
and another empire was approaching the Nile.
By the beginning of the 16th century,
Egypt was still wealthy and strategically important.
But the world was changing. European nations were searching for direct ocean routes to Asia, trade routes that had passed through
Egypt for centuries were beginning to lose their importance.
At the same time, a powerful empire was expanding from Anatolia, the Ottoman Empire. In 1517,
Ottoman Sultan Selim I defeated the Mamluks and brought Egypt under Ottoman rule. The age of independent Mamluk power had ended.
Egypt became an Ottoman province. Under the Ottomans, Egypt remained one of the empire's most valuable territories. The Nile continued producing grain.
Cairo remained a major commercial center, but political power increasingly moved away from Egypt.
Ottoman governors ruled in the name of the Sultan, while local elites continued to influence daily life. The Mamluks did not disappear completely.
They remained powerful landowners and military leaders, creating a complicated balance between Ottoman officials and local rulers.
At the end of the 18th century,
Egypt became caught in the struggle between European powers. In 1798, French General Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt.
His goal was partly strategic,
to threaten Britain's connection to India and expand French influence.
The French defeated Mamluk forces at the Battle of the Pyramids. However, Napoleon's campaign was more than military conquest.
He brought scientists, engineers,
and scholars who studied Egypt's ancient monuments and culture.
Their research helped inspire modern Egyptology.
But French control did not last.
British and Ottoman forces eventually forced the French to withdraw in
1801.
Yet Napoleon's expedition had changed how Europe viewed ancient Egypt.
The civilization of the Pharaohs was becoming a subject of worldwide fascination.
By the beginning of the 19th century, Egypt stood at a crossroads. The ancient land of the Pharaohs was no longer the center of a vast empire, but it remained one of the most important regions in the world. Its location connected 3 continents.
Its Nile Valley supported millions of people, and its future would be shaped by a struggle for independence,
modernization, and national identity. After the French withdrawal, Egypt entered a period of political uncertainty. Out of this chaos emerged one of the most influential figures in modern Egyptian history,
Muhammad Ali Pasha,
a military commander of Albanian origin.
Muhammad Ali seized power in 1805 and began transforming Egypt.
He created a stronger army, modernized administration, developed industries,
and expanded Egyptian influence.
His reforms were ambitious.
He introduced new schools,
sent students to Europe, improved agriculture, and attempted to build Egypt into a powerful modern state. Under his rule, Egypt became increasingly independent from the Ottoman Empire. Although officially an Ottoman province,
Egypt was becoming a state with its own ambitions. One of the greatest transformations in modern
Egyptian history was the construction of the Suez Canal.
Opened in 1869, the canal connected the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea.
This created a direct maritime route between Europe and Asia.
The canal transformed global trade. Ships no longer needed to sail around Africa to reach the Indian Ocean.
Egypt suddenly became strategically important to the entire world.
However, building the canal came with enormous financial costs. Egypt accumulated heavy debts, and European powers increased their influence over Egyptian affairs. By the late 19th century, Britain became deeply involved in Egypt. In 1882, British forces occupied the country after political unrest. Although Egypt remained formally part of the Ottoman Empire,
Britain controlled key decisions,
especially because of the importance of the Suez Canal. For many Egyptians, foreign control became a symbol of national humiliation. A new movement began.
Egyptian nationalism.
Educated leaders, writers, and political activists demanded greater independence and self-rule. After World War I, Egyptian nationalists intensified their demands.
In 1919, widespread protests erupted across Egypt.
People from different parts of society participated.
Students,
workers, farmers, religious leaders, intellectuals. The movement became one of the most important moments in Egyptian nationalism.
In 1922, Britain recognized Egypt as an independent kingdom.
Although British influence remained strong, especially regarding defense and the Suez Canal, Egypt had gained formal independence, but the struggle over true sovereignty continued. By the middle of the 20th century, dissatisfaction with the monarchy had grown. Many Egyptians criticized corruption, foreign influence, and social inequality.
In 1952, a group of military officers known as the Free Officers Movement overthrew King Pharaoh.
The monarchy ended. Egypt became a republic. One of the central figures of the new government was Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser became president in 1956 and promoted Arab nationalism,
independence from foreign influence, and economic development.
One of his most famous decisions was the nationalization of the Suez Canal.
This triggered the Suez Crisis of 1956, when Britain, France,
and Israel launched military action against Egypt. However, international pressure forced the attacking powers to withdraw. For many Egyptians, the crisis became a symbol of national independence
and the decline of European colonial power.
More than 5,000 years ago,
communities settled along
the Nile River and began building
one of humanity's greatest civilizations.
They created writing systems. They developed mathematics and engineering. They built monuments that continue to inspire the world. They created ideas about kingship, religion, art, and life after death that influenced countless generations. But Egypt's story is not only the story of pyramids and pharaohs.
It is the story of ordinary people who farmed the Nile,
built cities, created families, traded across continents, and adapted to changing worlds. Egypt experienced countless transformations.
The age of the pharaohs ended.
Greek rulers controlled the Nile. Rome absorbed Egypt into its empire.
Christianity transformed its religious landscape.
Islam reshaped its culture and identity. European powers competed for influence. Modern Egyptians fought for independence and national identity.
Through all these changes, one thing remained constant:
Egypt's importance.
Its location made it a bridge between civilizations. Its culture became one of the foundations of human history.
Today, Egypt is a modern nation with more than 100 million people. Its ancient monuments attract millions of visitors. Its language, traditions, and culture continue evolving. The pyramids remind humanity of ancient ambition. The temples reveal the creativity of past generations. The Nile continues to shape Egyptian life, but the greatest legacy of Egypt is not only the stones it left behind.
It is the proof that human societies can create, adapt, survive,
and influence the world for thousands of years. The kingdoms disappeared. The pharaohs became memories. The empires rose and fell. But Egypt remained. A civilization born from a river. A civilization that changed history. A civilization that still speaks to the world today. Egypt's greatest achievement was not simply building monuments that survived thousands of years. Its greatest achievement
was creating a civilization capable of
transforming itself again and again. From the age of pharaohs to the modern world, the Nile gave Egypt life, but human imagination gave Egypt immortality.